Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're having a lovely Christmas season and a fabulous holiday. And before we continue with part 3 of our story, which is a fabulous story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. The next few days spent at Uncle Chester's farm had been so much fun, much more so than I'd ever envisaged. My mother was in a very happy mood and couldn't stop smiling the entire time. But then again she'd been pampered within an inch of her life, and what woman doesn't like that? So no wonder she was in such good spirits. I wish she'd be like this back at home. My mother and Aunt Charlotte had gone to the local town and returned home. Well, to the farmhouse, that is, with fancy bags from various boutiques, as Aunt Charlotte had insisted on buying my mother a brand new wardrobe of summer clothes. The two of them had also been to the beauty salon together and the hairdresser's. My mother looked so pretty with her fancy hairstyle. It made her look like Marilyn Monroe. And even Uncle Chester said as much. My mother had refused to speak to my father when he phoned the farmhouse. She told Uncle Chester to tell my father to give her some space, and that she'd be home in a week's time. "Your husband is not remotely happy that you won't speak to him," Chester had told my mother. "It isn't a good idea, Coco, to completely ignore your husband. He's worried sick about you, you know, and certainly if I was wearing his shoes, so would I be. You shouldn't just cut him off like this." "I don't want to speak to him at the moment," my mother had said. "I told you, Chester, I need some breathing space, and Ambrose needs to respect that." After Uncle Chester had spoken to my father on the telephone, he reported to my mother exactly what my father had said. "Ambrose is very sorry that he upset you that night. He wants you to go back home, Coco. He says he misses you very much, and that he'll do his very best to get a better paying job. He says you were right, that it is a full-time job and responsibility to take care of little Bentley. He says he's been expecting too much of you." "Well, it sounds like finally the message is getting through to him," said my mother. "But that doesn't mean I'm coming home any time soon." "I think you're being extremely unreasonable to Ambrose," my uncle had said as diplomatically and as tactfully as he could. "He loves the bones of you, Coco, and your refusing to talk to him is doing his head in. Surely you understand that." "Good, I'm glad to hear that. Let my husband stew in his own juices. It'll do him the world of good. He might appreciate what I do around the house when he realizes that he has to cook for himself and clean the place a little. And then when he's all alone at home and got nothing better to do, he'll realize that he's only got a book for company, because both me and his son are not around, and I imagine he'll get very lonely." I was the one who got to speak to my father on the telephone when Uncle Chester asked me to speak to him, and all he could do was ask after my mother all the time. "Is she all right, son? I'm very worried about your mother," he kept asking me. "Dad, she's fine," I assured him. "Don't worry about Mummy. She's having a great time at the farm, and so am I." "Well, I'm glad to hear it." "Aunt Charlotte has bought Mum so many pretty dresses for summer. She's had her hair done. She looks like Marilyn Monroe. She looks really pretty. Uncle Chester has promised to pay all the bills that you've been worrying about, Daddy. He says he's going to write Mummy a big fat juicy cheque to take home with her when we come back." "Well, that's very kind of him," came my father's voice. "Chester's a jolly decent man. I just wish I could pay him back for all his kindness. Please tell your mother I love her, son. Will you do that for me?" "I don't want to tell her that." "Well then, tell her I want her to come home. You will tell her that, won't you, son? It's very important. You are missed so very much, the both of you. It's awfully lonely without having you around." "I'll tell her that, Dad," I agreed. "Good boy. You make sure you do. And while you're at it, have a good time at the farm, won't you? And make yourself useful to Uncle Chester. I'm sure your uncle and aunt will appreciate an extra pair of hands on the farm." It was wonderful to hang around my cousin Dougie, who was homeschooled on the farm, and so as a consequence didn't exactly have many friends around about his own age to play with, so he fully appreciated having me around for company. "It's so cool you're staying with us, Bentley," he said, slapping me on the back appreciatively. Dougie was very pleased to see me, but no one gave me a greater welcome than the family's 2 black Labradors, who were over the moon to see me again. They gave me a doggy welcome of note, with thumping tails, happy barks, and plenty of licks. They would follow me and Dougie wherever we went around the farm, and in our spare time, we would throw balls for the dogs. It made us laugh how even when they became utterly exhausted, they never tired of running after that ball. And Dougie said in the wood grove they were an absolute nightmare, for they went ballistic in chasing after the rabbits there. I could well believe that was the case, as both black Labradors seemed to be always carrying something around in their jaws, from soft fluffy toys, balls, and sometimes the odd stick they found lying around in the yard. One afternoon, after me and Dougie had finished milking several of the cows, as Dougie had taught me how to tweak the udders efficiently to maximise the milk delivery. Funnily enough, I had found hand-milking the cows to be an oddly rather reassuring job. It was when we were walking back to the farmhouse with 2 of the black Labradors running at our side, and Dougie was carrying a pail of milk to give to Aunt Charlotte, who wanted to separate the cream from the milk to make some butter, that I decided on this occasion to confide in Dougie about what I thought I'd seen when I first arrived at the farmhouse a few days earlier. "You're not going to believe what I thought I saw when me and Mum were driving down your driveway on the first day we arrived at your farm," I told Dougie in earnest. "It might have been a trick of the light, of course." I said this very quickly, as I wasn't exactly sure how Dougie would react to what I would tell him. I clandestinely worried he might tease me a little and tell me I was talking absolute nonsense. "What did you see?" asked Cousin Dougie, studying me curiously, almost as if he anticipated exactly what I was going to say, before the words even left my mouth. "I saw this very big wild man. He was covered in long, dark, flowing hair. He was very, very tall. So wide, you know, powerfully built. He had these dark, soulful eyes that gave off a bright yellow eye shine. I saw him for a brief second, and then when I looked again, he was gone. I thought I'd imagined what I'd seen, probably because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, that it could be real, I mean. But after I thought about the matter for some length, I know I didn't imagine what I saw. The wild man was real. I promise you he was." "I don't believe it," said my cousin. "I've seen him 6 times in the woods myself, and now you've seen him too. That's absolutely amazing." "You think he lives in the woods?" I asked curiously. "That's so cool." "I'm sure he does," said my cousin. "I've often seen his big footprints in the mud after it rains. I once took my father to show him the big footprints, but luckily I never told him what I'd seen, because he'd never have believed me. But it looked like the tracks had been covered up. It was almost like the wild man knew that he needed to cover up his tracks so that he could be discreet about his presence in the woods. Do you think if we go looking for him, that we might actually find him?" I asked. "I'd like to see him again. I'm curious about him, aren't you?" "Well, I've been into the woods hundreds of times myself, looking for him," my cousin assured me. "You're not the only one that's curious, you know. On most of those occasions I've never seen him, even though I've searched the woodgrove from top to bottom, looking for more of his footprints, or for some hair snagged on branches, that kind of thing. But I never ever saw anything that would give him away. When I have seen him, it's always when I was taken by surprise and off guard, so to speak. When I did see the wild man, he would step away from the tree, so he made himself known to me. So I guess he wanted me to see him then. He'd nod and walk away, swinging his arms backwards and forwards. On one occasion I noticed he had a couple of dead rabbits draped over his shoulders that I think he was going to eat. I suspect he eats off the land, fending for himself all the time. As you were saying, he's powerfully built and very human-looking, but he's also very mysterious. Like you, I wish I knew more about him. He seems to be able to hide in plain sight, you see. as I've often sensed his presence in the wood grove, even when I couldn't physically see him. It's like I know he's there watching me, but he's rather like the Invisible Man, because I have no idea where he's hiding. Do you think the wild man was surprised to see you on those occasions that he showed himself to you? I asked. I mean, did you catch him off guard, do you think? My cousin considered my words carefully. Well, I told you, didn't I? It was like he knew I was there all the time. I don't think I took him by surprise at all. It was more the other way round. You know what I think? I think the wild man only shows himself to you when he wants to do so, and to whom he desires to reveal himself to. Well, that's the distinct impression I got. I mean, think about it. When you arrived at the farmhouse in your mother's gold Chevy, he showed himself to you, did he not? And he vanished, but your mother never caught sight of him, did she? Is that right? That's right, I agreed. Well, said Dougie, I think he wanted you to see him, or he wouldn't have deliberately shown himself to you, would he? I mean, think about it. My mum and dad have never seen him before. My dad is always busy on the farm. He often clears away some of the paths in the woods. If my father had seen the wild man, he'd have told us about his encounter, but he has seen no such thing. If I told my parents about the wild man, they would think I was making him up. But he's real, and now you've seen him, I know I'm not going completely mad. But you're not going mad, I assured my cousin. We both saw the wild man, so he has to be real. And you know what they say about two witnesses. Why don't we both go into the woods together to see if we can find the wild man for ourselves? It's a while before dinner, and we've got some free time to do what we want, haven't we? I said. You yourself said the wild man has always been benevolent. So we've got nothing to fear, have we? If we go, we can't take the dogs with us, said Cousin Dougie, looking fondly at the two Labradors, running ahead of us on the path back home. But why can't they come with us? I asked, looking disappointed, as I loved having the Labradors following us everywhere we went. I don't think we'll see the wild man if the dogs are around with us. I've never seen the wild man when the Labradors are with me. The dogs bark at everything in the woods. They get overexcited, you see. We'll leave the dogs with Mum in the kitchen. We stand a much better chance of an encounter with the wild man if we're on our own in the woods. But don't get your hopes up, Bentley. My guess is we're not going to see the wild man. I say that because I've been in the woods hundreds of times over looking for him. I've called out to him, although I don't know what his name is. I've never received any kind of response from any of my calls, but I always get a sense he's watching me. But he doesn't respond to my calls, so it is a little infuriating, I have to admit. Maybe he's very shy, I suggested. Because he's big and powerful doesn't mean he's not reticent. My father works for a man who's absolutely enormous. He's so huge, but he's very, very quiet. Dad says he's very demure. So just because he's big doesn't mean he's not shy. Let's go into the woods anyway, I said. And even if we don't see him, it doesn't matter a jot. But at least we know we've tried. Why do you want to see him so much? My cousin Dougie asked me. Most people would be very scared of the wild man. The first time I saw him, I don't mind admitting, I nearly wet my pants, until I realised that his eyes were twinkling with amusement. They were kind. Then I wasn't afraid. Not when I looked into his eyes, that is. When did you first see him, Dougie? I asked. Well, I was in the woods looking for some wild mushrooms for my mother. She asked me to collect some wild mushrooms for her. We have quite a lot of them growing in the woods, you see. So I went searching for the mushrooms. I was about to gather a handful of what looked like edible fungi, when I had the sense that I was being watched. And then there he was, the wild man, I mean, standing 5 feet away from me, staring at me through his dark, treacle-coloured eyes. At first I avoided his gaze because it felt like he was looking right through me, and I got really scared. Finally I looked up at him. I was so terrified because he was so big, so gargantuan.
But when I looked into his eyes, the fear left me at once, because I knew he had no ill will towards me. As I was saying, I could see kindness in the depths of his eyes. He was pointing to the mushrooms that I was about to gather. He indicated that they were poisonous, even though they looked like they were edible. And then he nodded his head at me and was gone. When I looked at the mushrooms around the tree closer, I realised that the wild man was right, that I'd very nearly picked up poisonous fungi. They were deadly poisonous. That was the first time I saw him, you know. Well, he can't be dangerous then, can he? He stopped you from picking poisonous mushrooms. He was helping you out. And you say his eyes were kind, and that says an awful lot. My dad always says that eyes are the mirror of the soul. Maybe the wild man was probably watching you the whole time, keeping a distance, until he intervened and made his presence known to you, so that he could stop you from picking the poisonous mushrooms. Maybe if we go into the woods together and pretend we're about to pick some poisonous fungi, he'll try and stop us from doing so, and then we'll see him together, because he won't want us to be picking poisonous mushrooms, will he? That's a really cool idea, my cousin agreed, an approving light going on in his eyes. Why didn't I think of that before? The milk pail that my cousin Dougie was carrying made a clattering noise as the milk swished around in the pail. We finally entered the back door of the farmhouse. My mother was sitting at the breakfast nook drinking tea. She was reading an article in the local newspaper out loud to Aunt Charlotte, who was busy frying chopped onions in a pan as she prepared dinner. I could see Aunt Charlotte was thoroughly enjoying my mother's presence in her farmhouse. "That's fascinating," said Aunt Charlotte. "Coco, read me the other article, won't you? About the poor kid that fell down the old mine shaft." Aunt Charlotte looked up at the two of us as we entered the kitchen, with the pail of milk, which Dougie placed on the kitchen counter. "Oh, thank you, kids, for bringing me the milk," said Aunt Charlotte. "I need to make some butter, so that will do very nicely indeed." She turned to look at my mother briefly. "Coco, have you ever made butter before, by any chance?" "No, I can't say I have," said my mother, looking up from the newspaper she was reading. "I will teach you, Coco," said Aunt Charlotte. "You have no idea how easy it is. Even Dougie over here is a pro at making butter. You always separate the cream from the milk, and then you put it in the butter churner, and voila, you have butter." "When is dinner, Mum?" asked Dougie, his face fixed on the onions that Aunt Charlotte was caramelizing. "Goodness gracious me! Don't tell me you're hungry already, Dougie. You only ate a couple of hours ago. Did you not have enough to eat? Or have you got a bottomless pit for a stomach or something? If you must know, I'm frying some mince for a spaghetti bolognese that we're having for dinner tonight. But that won't be for quite a while yet. Do you think your hunger can hold on until then?" "I'm not hungry," said Dougie. "I just wanted to know how long we had until dinner. Me and Bentley want to go exploring the woods for an hour or so. But we want the Labradors to stay with you indoors, if that's all right. They can't come along with us." Aunt Charlotte looked puzzled, as the Labradors followed us all over the farm, and were now lying on the kitchen floor, looking up at Aunt Charlotte through dark, soulful eyes, as the smells in the kitchen had piqued their interest, and the Labradors were always looking for a tasty morsel that might just come their way, as Aunt Charlotte was a soft touch as far as they were concerned. "But why wouldn't you want to take both the Labradors with you, love, for a walk? They love it in the wood grove, do they not, chasing all those rabbits? They have the time of their life. Why on earth would you not take them?" "We don't want to take them," said Dougie curtly, so much so that Aunt Charlotte looked rather taken aback, while my mother looked up sharply from the article she was reading, her face expressing the same kind of surprise that Aunt Charlotte's face had done. I guess my mother was used to Cousin Dougie always being extremely polite, so his abrupt, rather brusque manner of voice had caught her off guard. "Well, that's me being told off by my son," chuckled Aunt Charlotte, making light of the situation. "Serves me right, doesn't it, for putting my nose where it's obviously not wanted. Isn't that right, Dougie?" she said, looking at her son affectionately. Dougie did not respond, but frowned, and so Aunt Charlotte quickly interjected. Fine. The dogs are welcome to stay with us here in the kitchen. But don't be too long in the woodgrove, or I'll send your father after you.
You won't need to send Dad after us. I told you we won't be very long, said Dougie, looking a tad exasperated. He nudged me. Come, Bentley, let's go, shall we? I could hear Aunt Charlotte telling my mother that Dougie was shortly becoming a teenager.
If he's this bushy now, she was saying, God knows what he's going to be like when he hits his teens. I'm dreading it. Sometimes I don't know what goes on in that head of his. It can be all over the place, and sometimes he's impossible to figure out. Sounds like I've got a lot to look forward to when Bentley gets to his age, my mother responded.
We can hear you, Mum,
Dougie called out, annoyed that his mother was talking about us behind our backs. Before long, me and Dougie had left the farmhouse, walked through a field of cows, climbed under the wooden pole fencing, and ventured into the tall, lofty grove of trees. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, without a single fluffy cloud in the sky, so it was the best kind of weather. We could see bees, the occasional butterfly, and some flying midges flying across the scrub. Some of them seemed to bite our skin, so we kept smacking them away. They weren't exactly mosquitoes, but they definitely enjoyed feasting on our skins. Soon we were following the undulating, somewhat overgrown trail through the woods, where a tangle of foliage, a few shrubs and thorny briars were growing amongst the trees rather rambunctiously, while ferns and shade-loving plants magnanimously fanned the floor with their viridescent finery. It was pleasantly cool in the woods as the canopy cast away the bright glare of the sun on this warm afternoon, so the shade above our heads provided us some agreeable relief and gave the woods a subterranean ambience.
I'll take you to where I've seen the poisonous fungi growing, my cousin told me. We can act as if we're about to pick it up and put it in this handbasket that I brought along with me, in the hope the wild man might stop us from picking it, he chuckled. But don't get your hopes up, Bentley. There are no guarantees that our scheming plan is going to work. The wild man is very clever, and I get the feeling he can read my mind, so he might know what we're up to and not fall for our charade. But we can hope that he just does. But at least we'll know we tried, I told my cousin. I don't want to go back to Detroit not having at least tried to look for the wild man. A while after having walked along the trail for a good 10 minutes or so, we both stopped dead in our tracks as we heard voices. My cousin stood very still and whispered, You hear that? He asked me. I nodded. Who is it? I asked. They're voices in the woods. Maybe it's poachers, said Dougie in a hushed voice. It wouldn't be the first time we've had them sneaking on our property. We've got wild turkey around here, you see, plenty of rabbits and stuff like that. Poachers tend to take the back road where they clandestinely park their cars so as not to be seen. That's how they access our woodgrove. Are you crazy? I said, pulling my cousin's arm away. The poachers will likely have guns with them. My eyes grew round with concern. Even if the poachers are carrying guns, which they might not be doing if they're scouting the area, they're not going to shoot us, said my cousin, laughing dismissively, as if the very idea was absolutely insane. Come, let's go and check out the voices for ourselves. They might not even be poachers, you know, but whoever they are, they're trespassing on private property, and they need to go. Maybe they took the wrong footpath and ambled off onto our property instead. It happened once with a very nice couple. They lost their way. There's a public footpath close to these woods, so it's easy enough for people to get pretty confused. I wasn't happy to be dragged along by Dougie deeper into the woods to follow the mysterious human voices that could easily belong to poachers who may very well be carrying guns on their person and may not fully appreciate being told by two precocious young children that they needed to leave the property at once, because number one, they were trespassing, and number two, it was illegal to poach. I could see by the resolute determination written all over Dougie's face that he wasn't remotely intimidated by the idea of confronting a couple of poachers and telling them to get lost, even if they were twice his age. I will admit a clandestine part of myself was in deep admiration for my cousin Dougie, for being so bold and so courageous.
I'd have loved to have that much gall to tell perfect strangers to go and take a running hike. But then again, I wasn't my cousin Dougie. The one thing I will say about my cousin Dougie was he was incredibly assertive and had guts of steel. It was as we got closer to the voices that Dougie beckoned for me to hide behind a tree, so that we would be able to witness who the people were that were talking to each other, without them noticing our presence, so we ultimately would have the upper hand. I was exceedingly startled when I realized I recognized the voices before I even saw the people. The voices belonged to my father and my mother's awful best friend, Sally Turner, who I loved to hate, who seemed to genuinely hate and abhor all men. What the hell were they doing in the woods together, of all things, without my mother even knowing about it? My father had promised to keep a distance from my mother to give her her much-needed space for an entire week. So what on earth was he doing here in the woods, of all things? I knew my father, much like myself, had an impassioned aversion to the likes of Sally Turner. He implicitly believed she deliberately poisoned my mother's mind against him. She most certainly wanted my mother to drop my father like a hot potato and become a singleton like she was. I absolutely believed my father was 100% right about this. I didn't trust Sally Turner as far as you could throw her. She wanted to sabotage my parents' relationship. My young ears had heard Sally Turner far too often telling my mother to leave my father. "Come on, Coco. You'd do so much better off without the miserable old codger ruining your life like this," she would say. "You and Dougie could easily move in with me. If you were single, imagine the fun we would have together, just the two of us." I shuddered as I reflected over the conversations my mother had had with Sally Turner over the years, as I was so desperately afraid that that frightful woman would tear my parents' marriage apart, even though my mother had assured me on countless times that that would never happen. As I peeked around the tree to take a closer look, I observed my father looked extremely pleased with himself. He was contentedly sitting on a picnic rug, laid out under a tree in the woods. There was a picnic basket on the rug, along with a big ice bucket containing ice. I could see Sally Turner opening a bottle of wine and pouring out a glass for my father. "Come on, Coco, you know it makes perfect sense. You'd be so much better off without that miserable old codger in your life," she would say. "You and Dougie could move in with me. Imagine that. We'd have so much fun. If you were single, oh, it would be wonderful." I shuddered as I reflected over the conversations my mother had had with Sally Turner. I was desperately afraid that that frightful, vindictive woman would tear my parents' marriage apart, even though my mother assured me that that would never ever happen. As I peeked cautiously around the tree to take a closer look, I observed my father looking extremely pleased with himself. He was contentedly sitting on a picnic rug, laid out under a tree in the woods. There was a picnic basket on the rug, and a big silver ice bucket that contained lots of ice. I could see Sally Turner opening a bottle of wine. She poured out a glass for my father and presented it to him. "This is a very special vintage," she was saying to my father, "a fruity cocktail of flavours that I chose especially for you today. You must try it. I think it will go very well with the picnic ingredients I've selected for you." My father took a sip, although he didn't really look as if he was sipping at all. He glanced down at the bottle and said approvingly, "This is an expensive bottle of wine, Sally. I don't know how to thank you for doing this for us. I was always under the impression you never liked me and were trying to split me and Coco apart, but I can see I was wrong about that. It is very kind of you to organize this picnic for us. So you're really saying that Coco has no idea about any of this?" "Of course she has no idea. I wanted to make it romantic for the both of you, didn't I? I can't stand to see the two of you being at each other's throats like this, when you both so obviously love each other. I don't want you splitting up over a petty argument over money. I had to figure an ingenious way to get the two of you together, as by the sounds of things you've got a lot of making up to do," said Sally. "You can say that again. I've been an absolute fool. I'm inclined to forget how sensitive Coco tends to be. So I've really ruffled her feathers this time. So I need to talk to her, Make her see sense. Well, that's my point. You can talk and settle your differences. That's why I told Coco that I was organising a picnic for me and her in the woods, so we can enjoy some wine together and a girly chat under the forest canopy. We've done this before, you know. Come out in the woods to enjoy some wine on Chester's farm like this. Last time, Chester's wife, what's her name again? Oh, you mean Charlotte. Yes, that's right. Last time Charlotte joined us. I organised the entire picnic for the three of us. Now I've done it again, she said proudly, pointing to the picnic basket. There's a lovely place in town, you know. It's called MacDougall's Picnics, and I got them to prepare everything. There's chicken liver pâté in the basket, toasted French baguette, strawberries covered in milk chocolate, bagels with smoked salmon and cream cheese. There are smoked oysters, some caviar, sliced ham, salami, and an assorted collection of French cheeses that you're going to love. You can't say I haven't spoiled the both of you. Sounds absolutely delicious. I really appreciate the efforts you've gone to help me, Sally. You have no idea what this means to me. Coco has been refusing to talk to me since she came to the farm. This way she gets to hear me out, I hope. I don't want to lose her, Sally. And recently she's been rather distant towards me, if you know what I mean. I've been terrified that she's going to serve me divorce papers. All our arguments of late have been about money. We are better than that, Sally. We shouldn't let a few outstanding bills dictate our happiness, should we? But of course you shouldn't, Ambrose. The good news is Coco will be with you in any moment. But why don't you have a sip of wine? You barely took a sip before. I do find a glass of wine is a wonderful way to unwind. And you're a little bit nervous, I can see. You'll feel so much more relaxed if you drink the wine before Coco gets here. She shouldn't be long. In the meantime, I will make myself scarce. I do hope things work out between the both of you. I'll keep my fingers crossed. I don't know how to thank you, Sally, for this, said my father. I got you so very wrong. My father began to take a couple of sips of wine. Tell me, Chester, what do you think of the wine I chose for the both of you? Sally asked. Now that you've actually tasted it, of course. It's very good, said my father, chugging back a huge gulp. Very fruity. Sally nodded at my father in agreement. Well, I always think in this kind of warm weather. It's really good to have a fruity wine. It's far more refreshing than something heavier. I detected a satisfied smirk developing across Sally's face, which I didn't like at all. I will leave you to it, Chester, she finally said. I've told your wife, Coco, where to find me. Although it won't be me she's finding, she chuckled. It'll be you, won't it? She's in for quite a pleasant surprise, I'm most sure. Coco knows this picnic spot very well. Good luck. I hope it all goes well for you, and the two of you make up. I want to see the both of you talking again. Thank you, Sally. I appreciate everything you've done today, and I really mean it, said my father sincerely. Glad to be of help, Ambrose. I better be off now, said Sally, trotting away. She left my father to his own devices, while he waited somewhat apprehensively for my mother to come. He kept looking up through the trees as if expecting to see her, but I knew my mother wasn't coming. She had not mentioned having a picnic with Sally Turner in the woods, unless she'd got the day completely wrong. But surely she'd have made mention of such a rendezvous, if it had been planned. I couldn't help but feel Sally Turner was up to something nefarious, but what it was I couldn't figure out at that moment. One thing I knew with unparalleled certainty was that Sally Turner was never this nice to anyone. Not me, and especially not to my father, whom she seemed to actively despise and love to hate. The reason for this dislike was obvious. It was because my father was married to my mother, and Sally wanted nothing more than my mother's attention greedily all to herself. Once Sally had retreated from the woodgrove, and I heard the familiar sound of her car driving away. I indicated to my cousin Dougie that we should show ourselves to my father. Me and my cousin approached my father, leaving behind our hiding place from behind the trees. My father at this moment was drinking his glass of wine and staring ahead at the footpath. rather nervously it seemed. He was probably not sure how my mother would react to seeing him, because he was going to surprise her, and he was, I imagine, psychologically preparing himself for the warfare he might experience. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.